Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining. My name is Michel Chambon. I'm one of the coordinators of ISAC, and I will be sharing our event tonight, the Asian Legacy of Pope Francis. As you all know now, Pope Francis left us, passed away more than a week ago, and we thought, the coordinators of ISAC and colleagues, that it would be important to organize more academic conversation, inviting scholars from different perspectives, able to share a bit of their own reflection about the Asian legacy of Pope Francis. We all know that Francis has a deep engagement with the continent. He came 7 times, visited 13 countries. He brought in the College of Cardinals in the Vatican administration a number of Asians. He talked about Asia constantly. He improved diplomatic relations of the Holy See and so on. I'm not going to repeat everything. So it is really my pleasure to welcome all of you and to now give the microphone to our first speakers. We're going to have 4 speakers, which will all present from their perspective. And after that, we will open the floor for Q&A, and the whole event will last for about 1 hour and a half. So our first speaker tonight is Professor José Casanova, who we barely need to introduce him. He's Ignatius Ilaturia Chair of Catholic Social Thought at Georgetown University. He's a well-known theologian, and it's a pleasure to have him among us. Peter, the microphone is yours. If you can unmute yourself, please. Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. My name is Peter Phan. I am a Vietnamese, and I've been living in the United States for 50 years. Yesterday, the 30th of April, is the 50th anniversary of the conquest, victory, whatever you call it, or the end of the Vietnam War. So it's ironic that we celebrate this the day after. Now, I have 15 minutes to speak about the legacy of Pope Francis for Asia. And I have 5 points, which means that I have about 2 minutes for each. And it is an advantage for me to speak first because what I mentioned here is simply talking points, and the other 4 speakers will have the time to explore, to expand further. But I will go with 5 points. The first legacy of Pope Francis on Asia is that he has appointed cardinals from many, many Asian countries, from South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, Tonga, Bangladesh, Papua New Guinea, Malaysia, Laos, Indonesia, Singapore, Mongolia, India, Timor-Leste, and Japan. Now, it's very interesting, this legacy, because right now the number of cardinal electors, for the first time, Asians represent a very substantial number. I am not going to play the horse race here, who is going to be elected or not. My friend Tito Takle has a great chance of being elected. But this is interesting, that the fact that he has nominated, has appointed, made cardinals, so many Asians, even from a small country, such as Mongolia or Malaysia or Laos, these small communities of Catholics, and yet they are represented as one of the many 135 electors this time. this is the first time that an Asian has a great chance of being elected as Pope. That's the first thing. That is the sense of the world church. The church is not made up of simply Western Europe, the West Europe or the United States, but made up of the churches all over the world, even such as small numbers of Catholics. In Mongolia, there's about 1,500 Catholics, and you have still a cardinal. That's amazing. So that's the first thing. The second legacy of Pope Francis is the notion of church. We call it ecclesiology. The church, Asians have to learn that church is not made up of bishops or priests or nuns or deacons, whatever number of the hierarchy is, but it is made of what he called it field hospital. That is the image, the most vivid image of the church that Pope Francis left us. The church is a field hospital. That is, in the hospital, you don't ask whether you're Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox or Muslim or Buddhist. The patient comes in, you treat them, you welcome them, you treat them. You don't ask the questions about their religious belonging. And secondly, the view of the church as a field hospital shows that the church is wounded. The church is not triumphant. The church is not made up of holy people, great people for whom the sacrament is a kind of a reward, but made up wounded and sick people. And therefore, what we need in the church as a field hospital is not authority, is not order, is not commandments, but mercy. It is the virtue that make the church a field hospital. Okay. The third part, the third legacy, and I think is extremely important, is the fact that the Pope has great love for migrants, migration. Migration, the first trip outside of Rome was to the island of Lampedusa, where he shows his love for migrants. Now, we know that in Asia, migration is an important phenomenon. The Philippines, for instance, or India, or Indonesia, or even Vietnam. The migrants is part of our social, political structure. And the Pope love and concern and defense of migrants is a legacy that will have a strong impact on Asia. The fourth thing is the dialogue that he has conducted with other religious leaders. Now, here I have to say that the focus is on Islam. He has been focusing on Islam for obvious reasons, and less so on Buddhism or Hinduism or other Asian religious traditions. Nevertheless, what's important is the attitude of Francis towards others. Dialogue is not evangelization. Dialogue is listening, is learning, is not converting, but listening, learning from the others. The way how he treat other people, he sit on the same level with others, not on the throne, but on the same level. It's a symbolic gesture of Pope Francis that tells us how to dialogue with people of other faiths than Christianity. It become a very important part of his legacy. And the last part is church leadership style. What Francis teaches that the church is a synodality, meaning the work of walking together, walking together. We're not commanding, not teaching, not but walking together as people of God. So I would say that this synodality, the synodality, that is a great legacy of ongoing. Actually, it's an ongoing celebration or acting of the church synod. So in Asia, all Catholics and all Christians are called to walk together with not with the bishops above them, not below the laity below them, but on the same road, the same responsibility and concern. So those are the five things that I would like to mention, which I'm sure other speakers would elaborate on. But it seemed to me these are the five things that will have a lasting impact on the Asian churches, Asian Catholics in particular. Thank you.
The Mongolian cardinal is not a Mongolian.
Thank you very much. We keep the question and maybe the comments for later during the Q&A. Thank you so much, Peter, for these perspectives. And now we move without further ado to our second speaker. So Dr. Maroja Assis, please turn on your microphone. She's a senior researcher at the Scalabrini Migration Center in Manila. The floor is yours.
Hello, greetings from the Philippines. Thanks very much, Michelle, and thanks to ISAC for organizing this forum. The previous speaker has alluded to migration as one of the legacies of Pope Francis, and that is the theme that I'd like to develop in my intervention today. So indeed, the issue of migration is something that was very central in his papacy. And as mentioned by Peter, one of the very first trip actually that he made outside of Rome, just 4 months after he became Pope, was to the island of Lampedusa. And Lampedusa, of course, is a symbol of how migrants and asylum seekers from Africa try to reach this particular island in order to have a gateway to Europe, so that they can escape conflict and poverty from their homelands. And what was very central about what is very symbolic and what is very significant about the Pope's visit to Lampedusa is also his observation that the world has become indifferent to the plight of migrants and refugees. And so in the open air mass that he celebrated on the island, he referred to the global indifference and challenged us to consider anew who is my brother. And when we look at the meaning and the symbolism of his last message, Easter message on April 20, just a day before his passing, he reminded us about Easter and its celebration of life, and how this starkly contrasts with the conflict, violence, and contempt that are experienced by women, children, the vulnerable, the marginalized, and migrants in their everyday lives. And again, he invited us, and I quote, to hope anew and to revive our trust in others, including those who are different than ourselves or who come from distant lands, bringing unfamiliar customs, ways of life, and ideas. For all of us are children of God. But between the landmark visit to Lampedusa and his last Easter message before he passed on, Pope Francis has consistently called on various actors and institutions, from governments to Catholics and the global community, to see migrants, to recognize and respect their dignity, and include them in the fabric of our society. So within the structure of the Catholic Church, it was during his papacy that the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Development, Human Development was established in 2016, and this merged four pontifical councils into one, including the previous Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant People. The dicastery includes the migrant and refugee section, which is under the personal supervision of Pope Francis. So among others, the work of this particular office has been to produce various pastoral documents that would guide the ministry and the pastoral care of migrants from the universal church to the local churches. Pope Francis really summarized in 4 action words, the social teaching of the church. And these are the words of welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating migrants. So most of the time, these 4 action words refer to the duty of the church in particular, and to the larger societies in general in how we are to treat migrants. But he also had a specific message to the countries of origin. And that is that, of course, we don't, in terms of, since countries of origin are the places where migrants come from, the Pope's message to countries of origin is also to build structures and institutions, enabling structures and institutions that would enable people to have a choice, to not to have to migrate. Okay. Now, as to the implications, the larger implications of things. In relation to Asia, Asia, of course, is a region in motion. Various types of cross-border migration are underway, driven by differences in development, demographics, and rights. Okay. So of the estimated stock of 281 million migrants in the world, Asia is actually home to the second largest region after Europe, which houses 87 million, and Asia has 86 million migrants. And actually, this number, in the case of Asia, much of the international migration and cross-border migrations that are taking place in the region really happen within the region. So it's intra-regional. But also at the same time, there is a sizable outmigration from Asia to the other regions, as well as movements from other regions to Asia. How has the church responded to the challenges of migration? Actually, it has done so in various ways, and it has been doing so for the last 50 years or so. Although the Catholic Church is a minority in general in the Asian region, when it comes to the promotion and the protection of the rights of migrants, the church is not necessarily a minority. In fact, if we look at the history of the various NGOs and civil society organizations that have been in existence in Asia since the time of massive and sustained international labor migration, most of the original NGOs are actually faith-based organizations, and most of them have been initiated and have been started by missionaries and also sisters, that have been that are present in various destination countries. The church in Asia has also responded through Catholic organizations like Caritas, which is present in many countries, and we have to remember that the Jesuit Refugee Service, which was founded in 1980, also has its roots in Asia, and it is present in countries like Bangladesh, where they accompany Rohingya. So also another church organization that is present extensively in the region at different levels, from the regional level to the national, down to the grassroots level, are organizations like Talitahum, which has as its primary program providing support to trafficked persons. And then, of course, there are the many pastoral programs in the care of migrants that are carried out by local churches, sisters, missionaries in different countries. So because Asia is a region in motion, there are programs that are present in origin countries as well as in destination countries. In origin countries such as the Philippines, the church provides pastoral care of migrant workers before they leave, and also develop a lot of programs to support the families left behind. Because of the temporary nature of labor migration in the region, there is this phenomenon where families are split, because it's only the workers that are allowed to work and stay temporarily in the countries where they work, leaving the families in the origin countries. So I think the Philippines has also developed many good practices in terms of providing support to the families left behind. In origin countries, we have also documented good practices, including those undertaken by Catholic sisters in enabling communities through livelihood projects, so that in these communities, people also have a fighting chance of not being forced to migrate in search of employment. And in destination countries, church-inspired organizations and actors have also been animated and inspired, as well as challenged by Pope Francis' four action words of welcoming, protecting, promoting, and integrating migrants. We can also see that in his visits to Asia, Pope Francis has also touched a lot on the issue of migration and has had many encounters with different types of migrants. So, for example, in his visit to Singapore in September 2024, his message to government and civic leaders sought their support in protecting the dignity of migrant workers. He said, and I quote, "These workers contribute a great deal to society and should be guaranteed a fair wage." So, while Pope Francis is very gentle, he can also be very frank and can be very direct in his language when he has to advocate for the protection of the rights of migrant workers. Also, in his message to government officials and civic leaders in Singapore, he said that focusing solely on pragmatism or placing merit above all things runs the risk of excluding people on the margins of society from benefiting from progress. But he also had some good words for Singapore in acknowledging Singapore's religious freedom, and he asked the government to continue to work in favor of the unity and fraternity of humanity and the common good of all peoples and nations. Pope Francis' concern and love for migrants is most of all felt by migrants. During the pandemic, he was among the world leaders who acknowledged seafarers and fishers as essential workers and was cognizant of the hardships that they experienced during this critical period. During his visit to Indonesia in September 2024, he was welcomed by a group of 10 refugees, 2 from Somalia and 8 from Sri Lanka, before he started his official visit. Similarly, in his visit to Dhaka in 2017, he met with a group of Rohingya and prayed with them. And this was not only symbolic because it really spoke volumes also about the reality and the practice of interreligious dialogue. So about 1 million Rohingya are in Bangladesh because of the persecution that they face in Myanmar. And what is interesting is also the response of the Bangladesh government on the passing of Pope Francis. They declared a 3-day national mourning, and they also offered special interfaith prayers in memory of the Holy Father. For Filipino migrants, perhaps I'll share something that's a bit different. And it was the joy of the Filipino migrants in Italy, a very big moment for them, when on December 15, 2019, Pope Francis presided at the first of 9-day masses, what we call Simbang Gabi or dawn masses, that is celebrated in preparation for Christmas. This is a tradition and faith expression that Filipino migrants have introduced in Catholic parishes in the various countries where they have resettled or where they are working. For Filipinos, both overseas and at home, Pope Francis celebrating the Mass with the Filipino community was an expression of the Pope's affection for the Filipino migrants. It was also at this Mass that the Pope, in appreciation of how Filipinos have shared their faith, that he encouraged them to continue to do so. So, and he fondly referred to overseas Filipino workers in this particular Mass as smugglers of the faith, contrabanditas de la fe, because of how they were able to share this particular tradition of dawn masses and 9-day masses in preparation for Christmas in the countries where they have pitched their tent. To be seen and acknowledged not just as workers but as persons, and also as bearers of faith, mean a great deal to Filipinos. So Pope Francis has been called many wonderful names, including being the People's Pope and the Pope of Migrants. The way that he lived, his sincerity, joyful witness, his concern and his love for migrants, and his constant reminders to work for justice and for peace, and to present the church also at the forefront of the globalization of charity. His many constant reminders, may this fall on good soil and prosper. I end at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marla. So may I call our third speaker, Professor Bernard Dasami, who is a professor of history at Loyola College, Chennai, in India. Professor Dasami?
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, all the panelists. What is the Asian legacy of Francis? That is what Professor Michael has asked us to speak. Maybe I will start with a broad brush. The first reflection I have taken for this presentation is the making of Pope Francis, or the Asian influences on Pope Francis. When I look at the Asian influences on Pope Francis, when he was elected from Latin America, he became the first one to be elected outside Europe. So that way, the whole world was looking at a pope, who was elected outside the Europe to lead the Catholic Church. As he was coming from Latin America, I thought that he was convinced of the fact that Latin America, Asia, and Africa, they all underwent colonialism. They all underwent decolonization. They all underwent colonialism, industrialization, exploitation, poverty, powerlessness, dictatorships. When Latin America was experiencing dictatorship, similarly, Asia was also, some of the countries in Asia were also undergoing dictatorship. Marcos in Philippines, or in Indonesia, or Suharto, or the East Timor with Portuguese, under Portuguese, and later under Indonesia. These were all realities of for Pope Francis. So when he not only looked at Latin America, but he looked at all the three continents which underwent this decolonialism and decolonization process with a much bloodshed, and also the post-colonial problems such as debt trap and debt crisis, mass human right violations, torture, disappearances. All that was very much in the mind of Pope Francis. So his pontificate in the 12 years, it reflected on this, on the realities that he experienced not only in Latin America, but also in Asia and in Africa. So we have to look at it from the point of view of the three wounded continents, and he also used the term wounded several times. So this is the first thing I thought that I will place it before you. The second thought I thought I will share with you is this: for Pope Francis, the his pontificate, uh, it was a reflection of what 50 years back the Federation of Asian Catholic Bishops articulated. 50 years back, the Federation of Asian Catholic Bishops, they thought that what is to be a Christian and what is to be a Catholic in the in Asian country, because Catholicism and Catholics are small in number, except maybe East Timor and Philippines. So in that way, when he was looking at that, the FABC articulated this in terms of initiating dialogue, and the triple dialogue. What they called as a triple dialogue: dialogue with the poor, dialogue with the religions, dialogue with the cultures. I think when we look at Pope Francis' 12 years of pontificate, he was reflecting all this. What the FABC 50 years before mentioned in terms of triple dialogue was the agenda of Pope Francis. He started the dialogue with the poor, he started the dialogue with the cultures, and he started the dialogue with the religions. That is how I see the pontificate of Pope Francis. And when it comes to poor, the FABC was talking about the poor in Asia, but for Pope Francis, the poor he was extending, and then, as rightly pointed out by the previous speakers, migrants in Asia, migrants all over the world, particularly the Mediterranean. Mediterranean is one of the one of the hotspots for migration. The reference to Lambuza, and then reference to refugees whom he met, all that makes sense, because for him, the poor or the homeless, the poor or the prisoners, migrants, refugees. So that was the one. And one can also see the influence of Asia in Pope Francis, particularly the South Asian influence on Pope Francis, when he created, in the year 2016, a dicastery for promoting integral human development. The human development is a concept that was developed by Mahbub ul Haq of Pakistan, a great economist in 1990, and the Nobel laureate from India, Amartya Sen. These were the two people who started working at the human development index from 1990 onwards. The United Nations Development Program UNDP started coming out every year with the Human Development Report based on these two economists who said that development cannot be measured only in economic terms, but in social terms, in terms of choices that are available to people, we have to measure. So, in that way, Pope Francis' influence of human development from South Asia, and particularly the human development indexes, indices, the choices of people made a great sense. And he made this dicastery by combining the four councils, justice and peace and migrants, combining all of them, he created in 2016 a dicastery for promoting integral development. The third reflection I thought I will leave it with you is this. His communication day messages were very clear of what he wanted to convey. For him, the poor, communication usually means somebody communicates, somebody gives a message, somebody speaks, somebody writes, the various forms of communication. But he goes beyond that by looking at listening as communication. That was his major contribution, I would say. The poor speak, are we, the subalterns speak. When the subalterns speak, are we in a position to hear? And this is where, in the communication messages, he was able to tell very clearly, keep your ears in the heart. Don't look at the ear, hearing is not here. Hearing from here, you have to take it to heart. So the heart level communication, that is what he emphasized in the communications, communications very clearly, and then also, effectively. The next reflection I thought that I will place it before you is his South Asian visit in 2015 to Sri Lanka and in 2017 to Myanmar and Dhaka. In these two places, it's all about inclusion and about a dialogue. And reference was made by his visit to Myanmar, and where he met the Rohingya refugees. He cried with them, and he said that the church is Rohingya in Myanmar. This is what he said. Christ is Rohingya in Myanmar. So, the way in which, he was able to understand the problem and then, present it to the people was something, which made everyone to look at, the issue in in the proper perspective. So that was, his one. And then besides, the in Sri Lanka, he was also talking about the dialogue and where the country was, beset by civil war for more than 3 decades, where he wanted to bring in, he wanted to, his address was to the different groups, in Sri Lanka. What I thought was, earlier also the reference was made here. His visit to Asia was initiated a major dialogue with two of the major religions in the world. One is Buddhism, Sri Lanka and Myanmar being countries with, Buddhism, with the majority following Buddhism. And then his other visits to Iran, Iraq, Turkey, he went to the Blue Mosque and he meditated. With all that, one can also see, his his outreach, to the Islamic world. His outreach to the Islamic world only brought fratelli tutti. The term fraternity comes from brotherhood, and the brotherhood is very strong among the Islamic countries and among the adherents of Islam. So that way, Pope Francis was able to bring in this idea of fraternity, brotherhood, sisterhood, that he was able to articulate so well with his visits to Islamic countries. And particularly, even he went to the extent of saying that if there is going to be, a kind of Islamic violence, then I would say that there is also Christian violence. So that way, he was able to tell very clearly that don't categorize violence or identify violence with one particular religion. All religions have, this. So that was his, idea. And next reflection I thought before I conclude is the appointment of cardinals in South Asian countries. The countries that did not have any cardinal, like Dhaka did not have any cardinal, Bangladesh, and Myanmar did not have a cardinal. Pakistan, second cardinal, and Ceylon, the Sri Lanka, second cardinal. Thomas Curry was there, and then Malcolm Ranjit was made, and then Kutis was made in Pakistan. Cordero was the earlier one. So, in the countries where cardinal, he was able to create cardinals. The countries which would never thought that they would get a cardinal. So his whole idea was wherever Catholics were in small minority, he would give them visibility and recognition. By creating a cardinal, you get, the nation gets, a recognition, your nation gets, in the international map, there is a recognition, there is a visibility that he was able to make. In India, it's very interesting. In India, there are 4 cardinals in the College of Cardinals to vote this time. Usually, Mumbai and Kerala, they get cardinal all the time. But he created Goa, with St. Francis Xavier is a place, that was not, that did not have a cardinal for a very long time. And he made Philip Neri Ferraro as a cardinal, who is heading the FABC now, Federation of Asian Bishops Conference. And he made all social groups. It's also very interesting that tribal was made as a cardinal. Another social group which is, very much discriminated in India, who were asking for representation. He was made as a, cardinal from Hyderabad. So in that way, in Kerala, there are many rights. And for every right, he was able to give a cardinal. So in that way, Pope Francis followed what, in my opinion, I would call it as consortional democracy. You give representation to every shade of opinion, every sector getting represented, one could see in Pope Francis' time. Finally, what I would like to mention is I was reading with a great interest Pope Francis' autobiography, Hope. And then I was also very keenly looking at whether there were references to Asia explicitly. Explicitly, there are no references to Asia, but Pope Francis was having, as I mentioned in the beginning, the making of Pope Francis was, and the Asian influence and Pope Francis was very evident in his autobiography, Hope. And his autobiographer, Austin Iberic, he wrote the book, the first book as a reformer, and the second book, The Wounded, the Wounded Shepherd. The Wounded Shepherd, he brings in, all realities. But Pope Francis was able to tell, that, he was not a great reformer. He said that, it is, you have, he told his biographer, you have missed the point. It is Jesus who is the reformer, not me. So in that way, placing very clearly, the Holy Spirit and how the Holy Spirit was leading him to do changes in the church as a reformer, as a wounded shepherd, that he was able to, he was able to highlight. These are the thoughts I thought that I will share with you. I will stop here. Maybe during the question time we can take. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much for this sharing and insights. Much appreciated. Now we can turn to our fourth speaker for this evening, Professor Jose Casanova, who is a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs at Georgetown University in the US. Jose, the microphone is yours.
Thank you and good day. I mean, for me, good morning. I am still in very early morning here. For you, it's already late during the day. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to participate in this conversation. As you can see, I am the only non-Asian in the panel, and I cannot claim any expertise. But I've been working for many years on the Catholic Church and globalization. And what does it mean for the peoples of Asia? And here I've been asked to talk about geopolitics in the Catholic Church. And yes, the Catholic Church is very interested in geo, but not in politics per se. It is an interest in the cultures, the peoples of the entire earth. And the Catholic Church, we must understand, sees itself not only as the Church of Christians, but it anticipates the unity of humanity that we need. And so besides its task of evangelization and of communicating what Pope Francis called the joy of the gospel to everybody, it is really to advocate for humanity as a whole in our global structures, in which neither the world capitalist system nor the world system of nation states really is able to address the crucial global challenges we are facing. Increasing migration, increasing inequality, economic inequality and poverty, the whole ecological crisis, the pandemics that we are suffering. And so it is all these crises that the Church has been, and especially under Pope Francis, has put at the center of its global message for all of humanity. We need to respond together, all humans, all cultures, all peoples together. We need to find responses to these challenges. In this respect, it is very interesting that it is very much in tune with the role of the Conference of Asian Bishops Catholics. They are very aware, both the Vatican and the Bishops' Conference, that they are a minority in Asia. And so on the one hand, yes, being a minority means that we can grow. But this is not the issue. It's not that they can grow in Asia as Christians, but that there is a responsibility precisely as a minority. The paradox is we can take the perspective and the vision of all of Asia in a way in which the religions of Asia themselves, because they are large but geographically circumscribed to specific regions and groups, we are the one that can try to represent all of Asia, particularly the most poor, the most needy, the marginalized, the care for nature. Now, we know that when Pope Francis had to choose a name, a fellow cardinal from Latin America, from Brazil, Cardinal Humes, told him, don't forget the poor. And so immediately he said, I will take the name of Francis, the first time that the Pope took the name of Francis. And for him, Francis was Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi is recognized as truly the saint of the poor, as the saint of nature, of the earth, of the ecology, of creation. He is the saint of peace, peacemaker, encounter. He went in the midst of the Crusades between a conflict between Christians and Muslims, went to Cairo to encounter the Caliph and to precisely do peacemaking. And it is these three, the preferential option for the poor, the need to dedicate ourselves to the care of our common home, the earth and creation, and the need for peacemaking and to be ready to encounter the other wherever they are. And so these three have been really the defining characteristics of Pope Francis. Now, in terms of geopolitics, yes, the Vatican, of course, is the dean of diplomacy, has always been the most important diplomatic corps in the world, not because they have power, but because they have presence from below. And they get the information not from their CIAs, but from the bishops who are in the ground. And so the view they have of the entire world is from below. The news that they are priests, their bishops tell about the peoples. And in this respect, it's interesting that when he came to Asia, the Pope did not visit the big superpowers of Asia, China, India, Japan, but really the peripheries of Asia itself. So it's the same thing with the naming of cardinals. It was not in the big power places, in the big cities, in the big countries that he named the cardinals, but in the peripheries, to symbolize precisely where the church wants to be, the places that the church views as the truly representative of humanity. Now, in Fratelli Tutti, which is, I mean, he has three major documents of his pontificate. The Joy of the Gospel, which of course is an exhortation, is not an encyclical, it's an apostolic exhortation for Christians to really themselves, all of them become missionaries, but not proselytizing, but by living the gospel and encountering the other, everybody, as brothers and sisters on the road, the way the Good Samaritan did. This has been the model for Pope Francis, how Christians have to be good neighbors, the way the Good Samaritan was the real good neighbor. And so the idea is we go to Asia to help the entire Asia because it represents the largest region of the world and also demographically the most populated part of the world. So yes, the future of humanity lies in Asia. And so it is because the church is interested in humanity as a whole and in addressing those issues. It's in Fratelli Tutti where he actually quotes his previous Pope, Benedict XVI, to say that, as he said, Benedict XVI, besides its interest, of course, in advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ, the church is interested always in the advancement of all of humanity and in universal fraternity. And this is the fundamental task. So the fundamental task is for the Catholic Church to serve not as part of conflicts, but as mediator, being precisely the peacemaker, the one that encounters all peoples, all peoples of the earth as brothers and sisters. And this is the message that Pope Francis wanted to give us in his trip to Asia. Think of, the advantage of coming the last speaker is that everything important has already been said. But if you imagine in his trip to Sri Lanka, in this trip to this shrine of the Virgin Mary, where Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and Christians came together to precisely as pilgrims to this sanctuary that was sacred for them all. The Pope said, you see, the people have no problem with religious pluralism. It is the theologians that create this problem. People, believers of all faiths, can come together and pray together and do walking together in sacred places. And so it is this idea that the religions is not what separates us, but actually what unites us. And the faiths unite us. And we have to use this unity to work together for the common good. Not for the good of Christians, not for the good of my country, but for the common good of all of humanity. And also, it was in Indonesia, of course, that he repeated a thought that comes from the Quran, that it was God that wanted all these religions to be part of humanity, that this is part of the plan of God, that the religious pluralism is not a problem we have that somehow we have to overcome to become united. No, we must encounter each other where we are, and the fact that this religious pluralism is planned is part of the mysterious plan of God to walk us together into a process that we hope will end with a full fraternization of global humanity. And this is the fundamental message that Pope Francis has been giving us for 12 years, and not only with his talk, but with his actions. It was his symbolic actions of washing the feet of inmates, and of inmates that were perhaps Muslim women, and of walking together with it has been repeated, has been said, in Lampedusa with all the immigrants. This has always been part. And of course, he went to Abu Dhabi to sign, together with the leader of Al-Aqsa, the document on human fraternity. And the book and the Fratelli Tutti is full of quotes from people of other religions, from the Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople, with whom he has written together documents on the need to take care of creation, and full of quotes from the Quran and from Muslim leaders. The same way that Laudato Si, which is the encyclical about ecology, about addressing our crisis, ecological crisis, is full of quotations from Asian Bishops' Conference, who have been very aware, Asian and Pacific, because here, again, the word Asia is a concept that has no clear delimitation, neither cultural nor demographic. And for him, there is a continuity between the Indonesian archipelago and New Guinea. And the Pacific Islands are the ones that perhaps are most aware of the fundamental ecological crisis that humans suffer. So in this respect, in all his trips, in his communications, he wanted us be aware that we are all brothers and sisters, that we all have a common home, and that we have to work together to take care of this common home and to take care of each other as brothers and sisters. So thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Jose. Before we go for the Q&A, I would like to do two things. First, I would like to invite our speakers to look at the chat box, where there is already a number of comments and questions that can start inspiring your responses. Meanwhile, I would like to call Bubbles Assor to briefly introduce the initiative of ISAC.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we go to, I'm sure you have all your burning questions and comments, but before we go to that section, let's have a very brief breather. And I would like to introduce what we do here, the Manila office of ISAC, based at De La Salle University, Manila, which has been in place for 2 years now to produce a digital Catholicism project, which aims to preserve digital artifacts related to contemporary Asian Catholics. We have 2 ongoing projects at the moment. First, the oral history of Asian Catholic catechist, with a focus on catechists in Sri Lanka, India, and eventually the Philippines, and hopefully in South Korea. We have photos of the Chinese New Year couplets, and the digitalization of Scalabrini Migration Center Exodus series, a resource guide for the migrant ministry in Asia, which will be underway. So the short video, which would be shown shortly after this, will be about another of ISAC's DLSU's digital collection project. Michelle? Since the beginning of his pontificate, Pope Francis has repeatedly visited Asia,
South Korea,
Sri Lanka and the Philippines,
Myanmar and Bangladesh,
Thailand and Japan,
Kazakhstan,
Mongolia,
Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Singapore.
Each apostolic journey has required extensive coordination and resources.
It has also generated rich media reports, documentaries, and conversation on social media within ecclesial circles and beyond.
This massive production of text reflects how Pope Francis has cultivated a vibrant dialogue with Asian societies.
It also shows a growing role of Asian countries in the making of the Universal Church.
However, most of these texts and commentaries on Pope Francis in Asia are rather transient and scattered across numerous media outlets and languages.
They quickly disappear behind the constant flow of news.
Do not let these rich materials being lost. ISAC, in partnership with De La Salle University Manila, is developing efforts to collect this data and build digital collections relevant to the study of Asian Catholics.
We are seeking support and donation to create an online database for the storage of information and media material produced during the visits of Pope Francis in Asia.
We want this database on Pope Francis in Asia searchable and public.
We want to allow educators and researchers around the world to search thematic recurrence and quotations and buzzwords.
This digital collection on Pope Francis in Asia will enable us to better appreciate the relationship between the papacy and Asia.
If you would like to contribute or donate, please contact us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have about 30 minutes left to jump in the Q&A. I saw already a number of commentaries and questions. So may I invite our speakers, the four of them, whether there is a question that you would like spontaneously to address. And for those who have asked questions, I may invite you to use the raise hand function if you want to make a comment or bring your question up. So either a raise hand question for the audience or for the speakers, you can just unmute yourself and respond to one of the questions. So a few of them. Margaret. Margaret, please unmute yourself. You can raise your questions. And Virginia, after that, you can go. Let's take the two questions together. Margaret?
You know, I would like to ask everybody, all this migration, it's massive, massive instability. And all of us have been teachers and worked with children. Children don't get a second chance to grow up. And living with this constant poverty and movement and instability, I think that we should start talking about strategies to be able to deal with the reasons why people are forced into migrating when they don't want to, and then they're settled in terrible places and they face so much, oftentimes, discrimination, that we need, number one, to deal with how can we make life more humane? And then secondly, so many of these countries have elected officials that are corrupt and are racist and are tribalist. I don't know how to say it, but why do we not call out the governments that are making it unbearable for people to remain in their countries when they would prefer to remain? Are we afraid of the backlash of retribution because we shouldn't be involved in politics? But I don't see the refugee life as being something that is of great value that we should say, oh, isn't this wonderful? It's not. And especially the suffering of the children who will never go to school, who will never have a decent life, who I think we have to think of more strategies and advocacy to deal with the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these comments. I think also the church, the progress that the church has made about sex abuse and how it's an act of killing to destroy the childhood of those children has long-term consequences, can be also interlinked here, how this importance of allowing proper environment for those children when they are developing. Virginia, would you go next, please?
No, I came a little bit late.
Yes.
So I don't know whether speakers before me or anybody spoke about women. Pope Francis did a few things for women. And among the last of his appointments was Sister Simone Brambilla as the prefect of a dicastery. Why was she not made a cardinal so that a woman could participate in voting for the new pope? I think in the 21st century, it's high time that women participated in this voting process. Why is women's voice left out of this process of voting. I think it is an insult to women to leave them out of this process of voting. And why is patriarchy and hierarchy still surviving in the church in the 21st century?
Thank you so much. Before the next question, may I invite my speakers to answer eventually? It's up to you, the four of you, which one would like to bring something up.
Allow me to say something about migration first, and then other people will talk about the Pope Francis' attitude, policies, and so forth towards women, including making cardinals and the right to vote. Let's begin with the notion of migration, not as a problem to be solved, not as an issue for politicians to either for or against. But let's consider migration as an existential fact of human condition. Without migration, humanity would not have existed at all, or at least would not exist as it is today. Once you see migration as something that is basic to being human, you will have a different attitude towards it. Not as something we have to build walls around, or something that we have to have policies for refugees or for asylum seekers, but as simply a day-to-day existential element, intrinsic, vital element of being human. Okay, so that's the one idea I'd like to pull out. Second, I respond to the first question of Margaret. I am a refugee in the United States for 50 years. I have never seen something like this is going on in the United States. Donald Trump, one shining, as it were, a shining point, successful point was his policy towards migration, stop migration at the border. All the rest he failed, politics, economics, everything. But the one thing that the Americans agree that he has done well is to stop migration. And my voice, my very anguished voice, and I say this, where is the voice of the American bishops? Are you so afraid? It's shameful, absolutely shameful what the American bishops are doing. And I say this publicly so that they can hear. One of my former student, Mark Seitz, was my student at the University of Dallas. He is the only voice, powerful voice, except a few others, 3 or 4 others. But the majority of American bishops are shamefully silent. Maybe they agree with Donald Trump. I do not know. But in light of what Pope Francis has said about migration, migrants, let me say to them, shame on you.
Additional comments, responses from our speakers first before we take questions.
Yes, if I may add, the migration thing, on the one hand, we know the problem, whatever the problem is, and of course the problem only comes because of the world system of nation states. There were no passports before the 20th century. There were no passports, so people could come and go, basically. It was much more open. It was the creation of territorial nation state with borders, and the notion that only we care for the people within that creates the problem. But even the states know that precisely the solution has to be cooperation between all the countries that have to send these migrants for all kinds of reasons, failed states, economic problems, poverty, or the countries through which the migrants have to go. and the wealthy countries that must be open to receive those migrants. Only with the cooperation of all these three and creating situations in which migration is not necessary, we can address the issue. Now, while we address this issue, however, it was mentioned about children. One of the things that the Catholic Church has done is the Jesuit Refugees Service that actually was born with the both people of Vietnam, with when Father Arupe established it to help precisely migrants. And out of it came the notion that the Jesuits are best qualified to educate the migrants in their refugee camps so they can offer them schools and universities with educational degrees, so that when they come out of the refugee camps, they can go somewhere with a degree which is certified by a prestigious Jesuit university. And it is this kind of solutions, this kind of ways of responding to the crisis that we have to be creative and do despite the nations states that create the borders and the boundaries. So we have to build bridges. And of course, we know that it is, I mean, Muslims refugees, most of them are in Muslim countries. So Turkey and many other countries. So we must be aware that the Western countries, which are the ones that has most resources, are really being very, very greedy here. And I say myself, look, Europeans in the from the 19th century to the World War I, let's say in 1 century, 60 million Europeans went all over the world and settled all over the world without asking for permission. And they were received. And now the Europeans cannot reciprocate. That's why the Scalabrini brothers that were established as a order to help Italian migrants, because most Italians were migrating everywhere, but now they help migrants everywhere, not only Catholics. So this idea that we all have been migrants somewhere someday, and that we all will be migrants somewhere someday, and that we have to accept this as part of being human and of the earth. And otherwise, there will be no humanity if people have not migrated out of Africa and settled everywhere. This is the beginning of our globalization. The fact that humanity migrated out of Africa and settled all over the globe. And now the task is for us to recognize each other all as migrants coming out of the same African origin.
Thank you very much. Mola, I saw you.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I would just like to add that migration did not necessarily be seen in crisis terms. No? And actually, I think it was there was a recent reflection about Pope Francis' legacy concerning migration that they commented that for Pope Francis, migration was not a crisis that needed to be solved, no, but or to be managed, but rather that migration is a sacred journey where God journeys with the people. Okay, I think the basic problem with how migrants are treated has something to do more with policies, state policies, and what was mentioned earlier that with the emergence of nation states and the bordering of countries into nation states, there's also the division between citizens and non-citizens. Okay, and I think in the recent visit of J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, and the conversation with Pope Francis was that the Vice President allegedly said that the duty of the government is first to address the needs and interests of its citizens over non-citizens. And actually to that, Pope Francis said that it is not to make a division between people, no? Because the basic teaching of the church and the basic teaching also of scripture is that human beings are made in the image of God. Okay, and that is something that is not always recognized by governments, and so that's why there is this distinction between citizens and non-citizens, with citizens having more rights compared to non-nationals. So part of the actually a persisting challenge is really how to treat people equally, and the acknowledgement and the recognition that no human being is illegal is something that is basic to respecting the rights and also respecting the dignity of each and every one. Actually, migration can be very beneficial to both countries of origin and countries of destination. But the way that things are also appreciated now is that for the most part in countries of destination, there's not really much acknowledgement of the contributions that migrants make. But because also of this various discourses about migrants being the source of crimes, migrants taking away jobs, and all that, that has led to a lot of stigmatization of migrants, which is not fair in the first place, because actually empirical studies would show that migrants contribute more to destination countries than they take away in terms of benefits. So I think I'll stop with that, please.
Thank
If
you.
I may add to the question of women, because it's a central question of the church today. It's the most serious question we are facing. This is the greatest transformation for global humanity. The question of gender equality is the most important moral advancement and revolution in the history of humanity. And the church has not yet addressed, has not yet responded as it should be to this question. And I think that the idea of making women cardinal is very good. We are not theologians. Theologians will solve the question of whether women should be priests or not. But if it's a question only of theology, then make them cardinals. Cardinals don't need to be priests. They were laity. The original cardinals in Rome, many of them were laity. So to show that really you are not discriminating against women, give them power within the church. And Pope Francis, one must admit, has started putting women in the dicasteries, which are the ministries of the church, but not sufficiently. So yes, this is the test. Give them power. If you don't make them priests, give them power within the church, the power of decision, the power also of addressing the questions of the church.
Thank you, Jose. I think many of us will support you here. Professor De Samia, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Michael. First on migration, just to add to all that, the rich contribution others have given, Amoris Laetitia, it deals with migration, and Pope Francis has been very concerned with one aspect of migration that he dealt very elaborately in Amoris Laetitia, namely the joy of love in that encyclical. Single male migration and single female migration. It is not family migration that is taking place today. It is single male and single female migration, and the family is left out. So in that way, his whole concern is for the protection of migrant workers in the destination countries and the protection of the families in the source countries. Both need to be undertaken. And this is what the Convention on the Migrants is also about. And the Pope emphasized on this. And what moved him was the corridors of migration, both the Mediterranean and the Mexican border. And based on that, his response was coming for both migration as well as later, refugees. On women, I would like to add a footnote here. Madam Saldana raised this question. I was reading with interest, his autobiography, Hope. And in the Hope, he has this, he has this observation to make. He says that the Catholic Church is female. This statement he makes in his autobiography. So in that way, when he assumed office as a reformer, his autobiographer says that he had two, very clear goals. One, to make women as deacons, and then to make married men as priests. But, the second book, The Wounded Shepherd, he says that there was such a lot of opposition for him that he was not able to take his progressive, agenda forward. I'll stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take another round of two questions. May I call first Dr. Jacqueline McEachin? Sorry.
Hi, yes, thank you. My question is more broad. Pope Francis reportedly told Cardinal Tagle that the future of the church is in Asia. So I guess my question is, for the next Pope, how is he to promote new evangelization in Asia, or best promote, and also encourage interreligious dialogue in Asia?
Thank you very much. Laurent, please.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for all the insights shared by the speakers, for today's event. Given that my question is this, and somehow it's also a troubling concern as a theologian, that despite the efforts of Pope Francis having a church that is beyond being self-referential, and it can be seen, I mean, he has been opening the church to wide directions, and especially having this dialogue with the marginalized people all over the world. There's also this let's say, I would say, small counter movement that is fighting the legacy of Pope Francis, especially, I would say, observably coming from the Western world. These are people or Catholics who have been promoting a medieval type of Catholicism, going back to tradition, emphasizing truth, and promoting the Latin Mass. And there's this somehow I see a geopolitical gap, between the concerns coming from the global north and coming from the global south. So I would like to hear. Of course, this might be just a small movement, but who knows, because it's attracting people, especially from the youth, who are fed up with a very liberal lifestyle or a secularized society. So I would like also to hear from the speakers how we deal with that, and how Pope Francis's legacy could, enlighten us in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I push our first speakers back on the front? Who wants to come on?
Michelle, I'll try to address Dr. Jackie's questions. I think something about what the new Pope. Wait, let me see. Yeah. Yeah. In relation to what she mentioned, I think what needs to be done is that, when Pope Francis Pope Francis visits to Asia have been very inspiring, but maybe what we'd like to see more is how these visits, especially his initiatives at the interreligious dialogue, can also be sustained even after the visit, and especially with that spark of inspiration. I think that is something that needs to be continued, and also has to be nurtured in the different churches in the region, because I think there's a lot of room and a lot of challenges that need to be addressed when it comes to interreligious dialogue. I don't know if this is something that's right, but in some of the discussions that we've had, particularly in the migration circles, is that there's this idea that oftentimes the initiative comes from the side of the Catholic Church, and that initiatives on coming from other faith traditions are not really that forthcoming. So perhaps that would be one road that can be continued down the line, and that is to continue these steps towards building dialogues and strengthening them with other faith religions in the region. And I think also one other aspect would also be to provide more support and guidance and also inspiration to the younger generation of Catholics and Christians in the region.
Thank you. Jose, Peter, Bernard?
I will simply add to what has been said concerning first the church in Asia and evangelization. I will let this to Peter Van. He is the great theologian of Asian issues, and obviously he will respond better. Let me answer the question of the polarization within our cultures and how this also reflected in our church. The church, after all, is a human institution that is embedded in human societies, and therefore the real church is as much a part of the problem, the institution, as the human institutions in politics, etc. And yes, there is a lot of polarization. I wouldn't call that the problem is the medieval. Medieval Catholicism was much more plural, was much more pluralistic. You had Franciscans and Dominicans and all kinds of power separation. It is the Council of Trent, the model of a centralized hierarchic church, that is the problem. But here, I have to say that it's not only really North versus South. As we know, is the question of the global culture wars today are about issues of gender. And here, the church is divided on these issues. And it's not only North against South, it is within each country. You have bishops on one side and another. And so this is why Pope Francis realized with the Synods on the Family that he could not legislate one way or another, that he could not simply from Rome solve these issues for the global church, that the global church had to be open to listen to each other, to communicate, and that's the process of synodality. Synodality is a way of precisely being a global church, sharing many different cultures, many different moral positions and situations, because this is normal in our sociological condition today. And therefore, it is to give an example of how, if we within the church can really be able to talk to one another despite our differences, then we can give a model, because today, the same thing with religious dialogue. Today, it is the religions that are able to dialogue much more than the politicians. It is within democratic politics that we cannot talk to one another today. So the polarization is really, really in those countries that had a tradition of civic political conversation. And today this is in crisis everywhere. And so the church, with the synod and synodality, I think Pope Francis wanted to show how as a church we have to learn to listen to one another, to communicate with one another, and to work together. And so I think this will be, if this process institutionalized, this ultimately will be the greatest legacy of Pope Francis, if this model of being church is institutionalized, not directives coming from Rome and the Pope dictating how Catholics ought to, let's say, behave all over the world, but really how to learn and from one another and listen to one another, because the Catholic Church can only be truly Catholic if it is pluralistic. It embraces all the cultures and peoples of the world, and pluralism is simply irremediable. So we have to learn to live with plurality within the church as much as plurality within our societies.
Thank you. I would like to bring a last question, but before we go there, Peter and Bernard, anything to add here about those two?
I hope to be very brief in answer to Jacqueline's questions about mission in Asia. One of the most pernicious error that we could make is to associate mission with baptism. We know after 1600 years of mission in Asia, Christianity is still minority, about 8%. And we measure the success of mission by the number of baptisms. And the text we go to is Matthew 28:15. Go baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit. And therefore, in our mind and in the history, we link the two activities, mission and baptism. But also in the New Testament, there are other texts that talks about mission and never talk about baptism. Luke chapter 5. There is the many other John. And so we have to decouple this notion of mission, evangelization, and then baptism. And measure the success of mission in terms of the numbers of baptism produced. So what in Asia? Asia mission is witnessing. As Pope Francis says, Show that you are a Christian. How you live as a Christian in peace, in harmony, working for the common good. Whether later on they will come to the Catholic Church or not is not important. We work mission among the people, missio not at, not toward, but missio inter, among the people of different faiths. And missio cum gentibus, mission with other people, and not simply among them or was at them. So I would say, suggest, therefore, we need to reconceptualize the notion of mission as witnesses. Let me end with one example in India. In India, there's a lot of bhakti, Krishna bhakti, devotee of Christ. They will come, and in Sundays, thousands of them, they would sing and praise Jesus for 2-3 days, but they will not be baptized. They are Christians, but they are not baptized Christians. So we need to take this idea that the church is not at the center of mission, but the reign of God. The kingdom of God is the goal, the top of this mission of the church.
Thank you. Bernard? I don't want to force you if you have nothing.
Yes, Michael. Yeah, I'll.
Okay, so I would like to ask the four of you a final question because we have only 2 minutes left. So take a time to think about it, but I would like to bring back the question I saw earlier popping in as a last final question. While we, of course, appreciate and celebrate the legacy of Francis, it might be good also to revert the question. So do you think that Francis had any regrets about Asia? In other words, Pope Francis' legacy is growing, but it's definitely not perfect nor completed. So what, in your opinion, will Pope Francis had hoped to accomplish in Asia, but regrettably did not get to see in his lifetime?
So somebody has to answer.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, that's the last.
Please.
So brief.
Well, very briefly, the principal philosophical idea of Pope Francis is time is greater than space. And the important thing is to start processes. And we leave it to the Holy Spirit how it will end. The fruits of what we start will be shown later, hopefully. So the idea is not to occupy, not to decide already things, but let's open up processes that will gain fruits later. And I think in this respect, we all must be hopeful that, and good hope, that whoever the next pope is, and I'm very hopeful because look at the last 5 popes. They were all great Catholic popes. They were all great global leaders of humanity, very different popes with very different emphasis and aspects of Catholicism. And it shows how great and diverse the Catholic Church is by looking at the diversity of the last 5 popes. And so I'm fully confident that the 6th pope, and I hope it's an Asian one, will be as great and as courageous to lead the global church and to continue working for the advancement of humanity and for universal fraternity.
Thank you.
I think, Michael, I started by saying that, the FABC has been the great turning point in Pope Francis' pontificate. 50 years ago, they initiated the triple dialogue. I think that's going to be the agenda of the church in the days to come. If whoever is coming, as the next pope, only with this we will be able to reach out, or the real Christ be be shown to others only through this way. As rightly pointed out by a theologian, James. Many a times it is the non-Christians who bring us closer to Christ. In that way, I think the point which he has made is very, very relevant. And Asia is pointing out to that. And if others can also see this as a agenda that is not, agenda that was not taken forward, I think the new person should take it forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I may end this. Among the many philosophical principles of Pope Francis, there were four of them. Jose just mentioned time is greater than space. I'd like to mention one more. He says, reality is greater than ideas. This is a great reminder to theologians who think that their ideas is everything. Reality is greater than ideas. Even our conversation today, with so many insights, remember reality is greater than what we have said today, ideas.
Yeah. Marla, final word?
Yes. I think personally I had been inspired by Pope Francis with the many and diverse encounters that he had with different kinds of people, outside of the usual suspects. I was, for example, really amazed by the fact that he had meetings with comedians, he had meetings with basketball players, and these are people outside of the usual notions that we have of what world leaders um, usually encounter. And his lived life was really proclaiming the joy of the gospel. And I think that is a legacy that will stay with us for a long, long time. And I hope something that we can also live with and live with. Okay, thanks.
So with this joy of the gospel, before I let Bubbles give this last final thank you to all of you, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you, the speakers and people in the audience, for making this conversation possible, making this celebration and also assessment of the legacy of Pope Francis in Asia alive among us tonight. So thank you so much for taking the time. This is not always easy to have, again, those kind of online meeting, but I really appreciate. And now I would like to let the final word to Bubbles.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And just following what Michelle has mentioned, thank you very much to our very esteemed speakers today and to our big number of audience, and which is very rare, but thank you very much wherever you are. And we also hope that you keep in tune, you tune into more of our events this year, or maybe, yes, this year. And yes, we hope to see you again in our next event. Thank you very much.